The Joe Biden Autopen scandal is growing, but is it going to result in anything? I think not, and more importantly, I think it's obscuring the real controversy. See, the problem isn't that Joe Biden used a machine to sign his documents. The problem is that Joe Biden didn't know he was the president. If you think that Joe Biden was approving all of these pardons, he wasn't. He wasn't approving the flavor of pudding that they serve at the White House dinner. Biden was not running his administration. It doesn't matter how many former staffers want to get up and plead the fifth, this cover-up is going to be exposed. And when it is, I hope America is ready to acknowledge the fact that we didn't elect a 46th president to run this country. We elected a committee of elder-abusing, puppeteering weirdos. I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome. We have a couple topics for you that we're going to get into some detail about, and then one that we're going to just briefly touch on for the week. We're going to start by talking about the Autopen scandal that has really blown up this week. We're going to talk a little bit more about Epstein. Hopefully this will be the last week we have to talk about him for quite a while. And then we're going to talk about Gavin Newsom making some idiotic comments about the trans stuff, which is just something he can't seem to help from doing, despite the fact he wants to be president. But first, before we do that, get into my favorite comment from last week. Favorite comment comes from Andy Man, who said, quote, "My fact-checking results are that about 80% of black citizens in the U.S. are descendants of past slavery," end quote. Okay, great fact check, Andy, and it's good we should clarify something. So I think last week I wound up saying that most black Americans are not descendants of slavery. And when you want to look at it, you say, oh, actually they are, because I conflated two things. One, which is factually correct, which is that more black people have immigrated to the United States post-slavery than were brought here as slaves. You have about 400,000 people who were brought to the North America as, well, I was going to say the United States, but it wasn't the United States when they were brought here. So I think North America had 400,000. I don't think it was necessarily the continental United States, what would become the United States. I think it was actually North America that had 400,000. But I could be wrong about that, because I think if you're including the Caribbeans in there, it's different. But anyway, I think America, we'll say America, had 400,000 slaves that were brought here. And more than that have immigrated, more black people have immigrated post-slavery being outlawed than were ever brought here as slaves. That is factually correct. Now, the weird thing about tracking descendants of slavery is that it kind of depends on how you're counting that or how you're counting it. So let's say that, for example, your family lived in the North for the past 300 years. So you were basically, your family from the 1700s onward were living in the North. Well, it's possible that there is someone, if you trace back your lineage, who was an original slave who was brought here. Absolutely correct. But you say, is that person directly in your line? Does it count 350 years ago? Because what we're mostly, when we're talking about descendants of slavery, we mean direct line of secession. So you're saying like, all right, my mom was born in the 60s. Her mom was born in the 20s and blah, blah, blah. You go back and you say, oh, so my great-great-grandma, there she is. We can find her. It's a little complicated because the records aren't great, but you say most people probably are. So I think the estimate would probably be somewhere between 70 and 80% is when I was trying to do my research. So good fact check, important clarification. Most black people in America are descendants of slavery. Kind of depends on how you count it, but we'll put the low estimate at like 65% and the high estimate at about 80%. So important to know, that is true. Still doesn't change my mind about reparations. It's still not, the whole conversation that I was having, or the reason why we were having that conversation, is because you say, is it a good idea to give reparations to somebody who was born in the 90s because their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma in 1785 was a slave? I don't think so. Anyway, that's just a personal opinion. We could have a whole conversation about that. We've done things on that in the past. But good fact check. Thanks for the clarification, Andy, man. Always appreciate allowed to clarify if I make a mistake. Anyway, okay. Topic 1, the Autopen. Does anyone know what an Autopen is? I'm just curious. Before we even get into it, do you know what it is? The name sounds intuitive. It's an Autopen. It makes sense. It's like an automatic pen, right? Yeah, that's kind of what it is. Most people think that just means an electronic signature. It's kind of the same deal. I guess the Autopen, which is weird to me, instead of doing an electronic signature and calling it an Autopen, it actually holds a pen and does the signature. So it is actually an automatic pen. It's a pen that is held by a machine that mimics signatures. I before going into this, I literally thought an Autopen just meant a digital signature, or like like when you do on the internet where you fill in your name and it just does a signature based on nothing, where it just writes your name and it's I thought that's what this was. No, this is literally a pen held by a machine that mimics a signature. Okay, so now we all know what an Autopen is, because I actually didn't. I thought it was just a digital thing. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The controversy here is that Joe Biden was using an Autopen to sign a lot of his pardons that he issued in the last week of his administration, and to sign a lot of the documents that his administration put out. Now, traditionally, the president has used an Autopen to sign letters. For example, if children write in and they write letters back to kids, they use an Autopen to sign those when some staffer sends it out. Or if they're releasing a general communique to the public, they'll sign with an Autopen, so the president has to sign every press release that goes out. So the Autopen is used for nonsense, is really what it comes down to. That is not how the Biden administration was using it. They were using it to sign pardons. They were using it to sign bills. They were using an Autopen for things that traditionally were never used for. Obama used them a couple times. He expanded the use of them. I think he signed the extension of the Patriot Act with an Autopen, which was a little bit of a controversy. Donald Trump used it a little bit, but the real thing is not that the Autopen, that they're using it. That's not really the controversy. The controversy is, did Joe Biden know what the Autopen was being used for? Because when Obama used it or when Donald Trump used it, that was never a question. They used it, or they delegated the use of the Autopen for certain things, but it was very clear that they knew what it was being used for. That's not the case with this Joe Biden controversy, which is why it's becoming an issue. Because one, was Joe Biden compos mentis, which means, was he mentally fit? Was he capable? Did he understand what was going on? Or did someone usurp the power of the president and use an Autopen to push forward something that they wanted to do? That is the question. Joe Biden granted 4,245 pardons and clemencies in his 4 years as president. This is a record by a long shot, because by comparison, Donald Trump granted 245. So Joe Biden granted 4,000 more pardons than Donald Trump in his 4 years as president. And this doesn't even count the thousands of marijuana-related crimes that they expunged from the books. So you're talking thousands and thousands more than Donald Trump or Obama or whatever the case may be. And the question is, did he have anything to do with these pardons? So, for example, Jimmy Carter granted clemency. He granted a pardon for every Vietnam draft dodger. He said anyone who fled the war, anyone who dodged a draft, he granted a blanket pardon. That's actually not what Joe Biden did. He didn't find a category of crime and pardon them. These are individual pardons that he granted for individual people. The question is, did he actually review them? Did he actually look at them? And did he actually grant these pardons? And the answer is no, he did not. And I think that's a gigantic problem if you're just delegating the pardon power of the president to your chief of staff, for example. So Biden's chief of staff is this guy named Jeff, I think it's pronounced Zients. I'm actually not 100% sure. Zients. Zients, maybe? Jeff Zients, who said, and this is from Biden's chief of staff, who said, quote, "I approve the use of the Autopen for the execution of the following pardons." So Joe Biden's chief of staff was giving the Autopen the go-ahead for the pardons. And it was not Joe Biden who was doing this. It was his chief of staff. Biden said he gave broad parameters, and the staff then approved the list. So Joe Biden would say something like, find me nonviolent offenders and pardon them. And then the staff went out and just found 4,000 of them and said, all right, here you go, and then used the Autopen to sign off on them. He didn't review them. He didn't look at them. He doesn't know them. And you know that this is true because there are some terrible, terrible people who got approved for the pardon. So again, 4,275 pardons. That includes people like Adrian Peeler. Who's Adrian Peeler? He's a 48-year-old who was convicted of conspiracy to murder an 8-year-old boy and her mother an 8-year-old boy and his mother in 1999. This guy was so bad that the state that he was from actually changed the laws to be more harsh to people like him because they didn't have the laws on the books to charge him with everything that they wanted to. So they actually made more laws because this guy was so terrible. Joe Biden pardoned him. He granted clemency, and he basically released him about 9 years before he was even eligible for parole. Why would he do this? No one knows. No one knows the answer. Why this guy who wanted to murder a small child and his mother was released from prison. No one can answer that question because no one knows. Joe Biden certainly can't answer that question because he doesn't know who this person is. And that's a big deal. It's a big deal that Joe Biden was pardoning people without knowing who they are. And again, this isn't a broad thing. People will point to the Vietnam, for example. Again, we would go back to Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter pardoned draft dodgers. Okay, that's a broad category of crime. He says, we're not going to pursue this. Or you can point to Donald Trump. Say, Donald Trump actually pardoned 1,600 people this second go-around because he pardoned people from January 6th. Again, this is a broad-based thing. That was basically one act. It'd be like coming out in the Democrats saying, we're going to pardon anyone who participated in the 2020 riots. Okay, that's fine. You actually maybe could do that. I'm not 100% sure because you, excuse me one second. I got a little tickle in my throat. So I'm not 100% sure you could do that because I'm pretty sure most of those people would be guilty of state crimes. But the January 6th thing is actually a federal crime. So Donald Trump had the ability to pardon them because it's federal crime. And that's all the president can do is pardon people for federal crimes. But my point is, this isn't what happened. Joe Biden, these are not a broad category of crime. These are individual acts, individual people who each got pardoned individually. So Joe Biden didn't approve them. Joe Biden didn't know who they are. Joe Biden doesn't know this. And this is actually not really the controversy because it's not necessarily about the pardons. The question is, who was in charge of the White House? That's the question. That is the controversy. And the Autopen is just a symptom. It is not the cause of the controversy. It's a symptom because the controversy is who knew that Joe Biden wasn't running the White House or the executive branch? And what were those people doing? Who was running it? Who gave the go-ahead? Right now, it looks like the chief of staff was approving the use of the Autopen for the president. Is he allowed to do that? The chief of staff, does he have the ability to delegate the use of the president's signature? I think only the president has that right. So, for example, let's use this. This goes back all the way, by the way, to the 1600s. You have the ability to delegate your signature or your approval or have someone else sign for you. And there's almost, we have, I guess, 400 and something years of precedent for that. That goes back, I think it was 1691. I actually am not 100% sure of the year. I'd have to go double check that. But it goes all the way back to the 1600s when it was basically established that the king could let somebody else sign for him, or the king could delegate his signature to somebody else, say, hey, have that person sign for me. 400 years of precedent for this. So it's not uncommon for people to do this. You can do this in the medical realm. I could say, well, I hurt my right hand, or my right hand gets lopped off. And I say, I just have my wife or my brother or my mom sign for me. You're allowed to do this in any realm. The question is, did Joe Biden knowingly delegate his power? Because in the medical field, if you don't have the ability to sign for yourself, so for example, you're not alert and oriented ×4, you don't know who you are, where you're at, what's going on, or what time it is, you don't know all of these questions, you're not in the right to sign for yourself or refuse care. If that happens with the president, that you don't just to delegate your power to your wife or your son or your chief of staff. It actually has a process to go through. The vice president then has that power. The vice president should take over. It should have been Kamala Harris, God forbid. And that's fine, but that's not what happened. So the question is, did someone in the White House, the chief of staff or Jill Biden or Hunter Biden, did they usurp the power of the president and pretend that the president was giving directives? That's the controversy. That's what we need to understand. And the fact that the Autopen was used is really not the issue. The question is, was the Autopen used without authorization of the president to use somebody else's agenda? Plus, Joe Biden pardoned a bunch of family members. Hunter Biden was pardoned. Anthony Fauci was pardoned. I think he may have pardoned his wife. I'm not 100% sure. But he pardoned his brother. All of these people in the family. If you imagine that Joe Biden didn't know what was going on, Hunter Biden is using the pen of the president and just pardons himself, or the chief of staff pardons himself, or all these people just pardon themselves or use Joe Biden's mental senility to convince him to pardon them. It's just ridiculous that this is the controversy. By the way, it's the biggest scandal of all time that Joe Biden pardoned his family members. Remember everybody saying he wouldn't do that. Oh, Joe Biden's a man of honor. He's a man of respect. He wouldn't do this. And they talked about when Donald Trump was leaving office. Donald Trump, he could pardon his friends and family and we'll never be able to convict him of crimes and it'll be terrible because that's what tyrannical dictators do. And then Joe Biden did it and everyone goes, yeah, forget about that. Don't worry about that. It's not a big deal. It was a big deal. It's a big deal because his family had $27 million from foreign governments passed to them through shell companies that they set up to avoid implicating themselves. But, whatever. The biggest scandal of all time is how corrupt Joe Biden and his family are. People don't know. It doesn't matter. We're not going to get there. Joe Biden not being able to execute the office of the president is is really the scandal here. And I want to show you that this is not me. This is not a conspiracy anymore. This is a real thing that's happening. It's not that we're just all speculating that Joe Biden didn't have it. Here's what's happened recently, where Joe Biden's doctor and Anthony Bernal, who was the chief of staff of the First Lady, have both been brought before congressional committees to testify. And here's how their testimony has gone. Now, it's important. Watch this.
Which was also furnished to your counsel. The questioning will proceed in rounds. The majority will ask questions for an hour, and then the minority will have an opportunity
This is Joe
to
Biden's
ask questions
doctor,
for an
Kevin
hour if they choose.
O'Connor.
There will be one staff counsel per side asking the questions during each round. To the extent members have questions for the witness, they will be propounded during their side's respective rounds. Do you understand?
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer based on the physician-patient privilege and reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. I am not a lawyer, and I must follow my lawyer's advice in this matter.
So, gentlemen, we intend to assert both privileges with regard to any questions that would be asked at this deposition. And Dr. O'Connor will not answer any questions.
Can we go off the record for 1 second?
Okay, so that is Kevin O'Connor, who was Joe Biden's physician. Joe Biden's physician who went out there. By the way, the idea that somehow you're violating doctor-patient confidentiality. You're the president's physician. You go out there and you talk about the president's health. That happens all the time. It's already happened a whole bunch. There's absolutely no reason why he can't talk about this. It's not a violation of HIPAA. It's a little bit different when you're talking about the president of the United States. But this is how his doctor, Joe Biden's doctor, has to respond to questions. I plead the Fifth. On advice of counsel, I'm going to say doctor-patient confidentiality and my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Then his lawyer chimes in and says, just so you guys know, he's going to do this for every question. They go off the record. He comes back. And they're asking him questions like, did anyone ever ask you to lie about Joe Biden's mental faculties? He pleads the Fifth. Did you know that Joe Biden, did he ever demonstrate mental decline? I plead the Fifth. Did you ever lie about the president's capabilities? I plead the Fifth. This happens a bunch. That's all he says, this whole thing. This goes on for 20 minutes. It goes on, and he just pleads the Fifth for everyone. How about Anthony Bernal, who was Joe Biden's chief of staff? What's he do?
Bernal, did you ever advise President Joe Biden to pardon his son, Hunter Biden?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights under the Constitution.
Thank you. We're going to go off the record real quick. Okay, we'll go back on the record. Mr. Bernal, was President Joe Biden fit to exercise the duties of the president?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights under the Constitution.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Bernal has invoked the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Mr. Bernal, please be very clear. Are you declining to answer the question put to you solely on the ground that you believe the answer will incriminate you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights under the Constitution.
Mr. Bernal, did any unelected official or family member of President Joe Biden execute the duties of the presidency?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights under the Constitution.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Bernal has invoked the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Mr. Bernal, please be very clear. Are you declining to answer the question put to you solely on the ground that you believe the answer will incriminate you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights under the Constitution.
Mr. Bernal, did President Joe Biden ever instruct you to lie regarding his health at any time, including but not limited in your testimony to Congress today?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights under the Constitution.
Okay, this goes on, again, for a long time. So Joe Biden's doctor and the chief of staff of the First Lady both plead in the Fifth. Did Joe Biden lie? Ask you to lie? Did anyone ask you to lie? Was he capable of the office of the presidency? Did anyone come to you and say, we need you to go to this committee and lie about what's going to happen? Plead the Fifth, plead the Fifth, plead the Fifth. It's not a good look. How about, it reminds me of this. It reminds me of this over here. This Senate subcommittee hearing on narcotics.
Sir, is it true you were a crack cocaine dealer for 7 years?
I plead the Fifth.
Sir, will you tell us about the cartels you dealt with in your time as a crack cocaine dealer?
No, but I can tell you that I plead the Fifth.
Exactly how much money did you earn in your time as a crack cocaine dealer?
I said there are so many amendments in the Constitution of the United States of America. I can only choose one. I can only choose one. I plead the Fifth. I plead.
So that's every person associated with the Biden White House right now coming out there like Dave Chappelle pleading the Fifth, and it's great. So it's important to remember. So this doesn't look good. It doesn't look good for the White House. I feel like a bunch of people are scrambling right now because they realize that they could be implicated the more that these committees dig into the cover-up, which is one of the biggest political scandals of all time. And they don't want to incriminate themselves, and I get it. And it's important to remember, this is important, and we want to show this too. It is important to remember that, and let's just take a look at the actual text here before we go. It's important to remember that pleading the Fifth doesn't make you guilty of anything. It is a right for a reason, and it's an important right, and it's why it's one of the first 10 that were put in the Bill of Rights by James Madison. It's important to remember that it doesn't make you guilty. It's not a good look, because if somebody says, hey, did you kill that guy? And I go, I plead the Fifth. Well, it's also very easy to just say, no, I didn't kill him. That also is a good answer. So often it's used because you're not allowed to compel speech. You're not allowed to force someone to incriminate themselves. But at the same time, if you didn't do it, sometimes it's easier just to say that. Anyway, so let's take a look. This is the Fifth Amendment. Whoa. This is the Fifth Amendment of the United States. So it says, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on the presentment or indictment of a grand jury. It means that every time you want to go to trial, you have to go to a grand jury first and get an indictment. Then it says, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service of time of war or public danger. And the carve-out is said you don't have to go to a grand jury if it is military related. Nor shall any person be subject to the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. So this is your protection against double jeopardy, meaning that the government can't try you for the same crime twice. If you go to trial and you win, you're acquitted, then they can't just say, well, we're going to go again and see if we get a better jury. It doesn't work that way. You only get one trial. Nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. So there it is right there. The government cannot compel you to incriminate yourself in a crime. nor shall they be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So it's important to remember that that amendment exists for a reason. The government cannot compel speech from you. They cannot compel you to incriminate yourself. But it is not a good look when you get up there and you're asked very basic questions. Hey, could Joe Biden do the job of the president? What are you going to incriminate yourself in? What do you think? And I get it. The thing I would tell people, put on your fake lawyer hat, right? And then say, what if I was your lawyer, what would I tell you? And the answer is never speak to anyone about anything. Don't talk to the police about things that have anything to do. If the police want to stop you and ask you questions about something, you say, am I being detained? Am I under arrest? If the answer is no, then you're free to leave. If the answer is yes, then say you can talk to my lawyer. I get that. That would be what I'd do. I wouldn't want to get up there and testify because about something that could potentially implicate me in anything. So I understand the urge. But it's not a good look for the White House when you can't answer very, very basic questions like, was Joe Biden capable of the job? I think that this cover-up is going to be exposed. They're going to get to the bottom of it. And when it breaks, I hope America is ready for the fallout because it's going to be huge and it's going to implicate a lot of people. I think a lot of higher-up Democrats are going to be caught up in this scandal if they're not already. And I think a lot of the White House staff is going to have a really hard time shaking this reputation. Like working in politics moving forward is going to be difficult for somebody who's the chief of staff for Joe Biden and his administration when everyone says, well, did you understand that you worked with the president every day? You're saying you didn't see the scandal, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to be a good look. It's going to make your life difficult. I hope America's ready for it. Anyway, let's move on. How long did we spend on that? Oh my gosh, so long. That's why these other two topics, I knew we could spend a little bit of time on that because these other two topics are very short because we talked about this one next week. And it's topic 2, the Epstein fallout. Now, I'm beginning to feel like Donald Trump because this Epstein guy just won't die and go away. And I am so sick of it. I do not care. I care in the fact that there are people who are victims of this guy. He was a monster. He was an animal. And I care about that. But I told you last week, and I really mean it, I do not think that this is the scandal that people think it is. I could be wrong, and I'm always subject to change my mind if we get new evidence, but I don't see any evidence. And we went through it last week. But the reason why we're talking about it again this week is because it's interesting to watch the fallout that's happened this week. I think Trump is upset about how much focus is on Epstein the past couple weeks because he's been doing some good stuff as the president. And people are pretending that MAGA is upset, that the people are upset with Donald Trump. People are upset with the Republicans. And I think there's a little bit of that. Don't get me wrong. I think that there's some of that going around. But I do not think that it's as much as people are wanting to pretend. I think that the media has a interest in making it seem much worse than it is. I don't think people are turning on Donald Trump. I don't think that. I don't think that the Republican base who put Donald Trump in charge is going to look at this Epstein scandal and say, oh, that's it. This is ridiculous. I'm out. No more Donald Trump. He's letting me down. I don't see this being the thing that is going to break that wide open. I could be wrong, but I just don't see it. I don't think people are going to look at this and say, this is a cover-up. Anyone, by the way, who thinks that they're not releasing this because of some stupid reason like Donald Trump is in the files, I'm going to just say this, and I'm trying to determine how mean I want to be about it. You're being dumb, and that's as nice as I can be about it. If you think that Donald Trump is trying to cover up his own bad behavior because he's in the files, you're dumb. I'm sorry. It's coming across as very mean. I just mean you're being foolish. And I mean that in the nicest way possible. Again, I'm sorry I just called you dumb, but you're being foolish. And here's why. Just think about this. Donald Trump, there was this brief time. I don't know if you remember it. There was a brief moment in time. It lasted about 4 years between 2020 and 2024 when Donald Trump wasn't the president. I don't know if you remember that time. It seems like we all want to forget about how terrible the Biden presidency was, but it did happen. And Donald Trump was not in charge. And the fact that Donald Trump was not in charge and the Democrats were in charge of the executive and the Democrats won Congress, you have to ask yourself, why wouldn't the Democrats release anything that could damage Donald Trump? You don't have an answer to that because the answer doesn't exist. The Democrats were in charge. They had the Epstein files. They had control of everything. The Biden DOJ Merrick Garland, they were in charge of all this stuff. That we're looking around. Where are the files? Where were they? You're telling me Donald Trump's in there. He's implicated in any way, in some small, tiny little way. And the Democrats wouldn't have released it. I think you're out of your mind. I think you are a crazy person if you think that that's true. You think that they had 4 years to go through them and look through them and find any little piece of thing that they could that would implicate Donald Trump, and they just didn't release it when they were in charge? This is outrageous. It's wild to me that you think that could possibly take place in America in the modern day politics. Anything that can make Donald Trump look bad would have immediately been released. It would have been leaked. It would have been declassified. It would have gone out and they would have said, look, Donald Trump, here's a picture of him with Epstein on the island and there's 2 young girls. And they would have been like, oh my God. And that would have been it. They would have done that day one. It didn't exist. It doesn't exist. And I think that's why Donald Trump is so frustrated, is because I think that what people think are in the files is not really in there. I think Jeffrey Epstein had a lot of child porn. I do not think he was part of some big blackmail extortion scheme. I did think that for a long time. I just don't think it anymore. And why? Because I don't see any evidence for it. And you have to tell me why Kash Patel and Dan Bongino would lie to me. Why would those 2 people want to get in there and cover up this thing? I don't see a reason. I do not understand why you think that they would do this, or what their goal or benefit is for those 2 people to cover up for anyone. It doesn't make any sense to me. They're not covering up for Donald Trump. Again, I just told you why I think that. So who are they protecting? Why would they do it? It doesn't make any sense. And I think that it's important to note that I still think that this is people need to move on from this. And MAGA, quote unquote MAGA, needs to understand that Donald Trump is getting the MAGA Republican agenda accomplished in a way that we never thought possible. And it's important to just allow him to do that and quit giving him a hard time. What's wrong with you? Stop it. Give Donald Trump some grace on this issue, because I think that he said it this week. Release everything. I don't care. Release everything and you'll see that there's nothing in there. Donald Trump's seen it. He knows there's nothing in there. That's why he's not interested. It's not because it's some giant scandal. It's because it's nothing. And they don't have anything. And if they did, it's gone. I don't know what to tell you. It's never going to be a thing, because if it existed in the first place, it's gone. It doesn't exist right now. Or it's in somebody's safe in some bunker that we're never going to know about. So I don't know. I don't care about this topic enough, because I think Jeffrey Epstein was a slime bag, but I don't think they're covering up his murder, and I don't think they're covering up some extortion blackmail scheme. I think they just don't want to release a bunch of child pornography to the internet, which makes sense to me. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Just give Donald Trump some grace and understand that he's not in the files. Quit hoping for that if you're on the other end of the spectrum there. If you're a Democrat, it's just not going to happen. I hate to break your heart. Anyway, okay, that's all. Again, that's a short one because I said everything I wanted to say last week. So we're going to move on. Topic 3, Gavin. What are you doing? This clip I'm about to show you is a test for Democrats who want to win elections and want to hold office. If they can't answer this question, don't elect them. If you agree with them, if you agree with what Gavin Newsom has to say here, seek therapy. I don't know what to tell you. This is what a terrible answer. I can't believe, I'm going to show you the video, then we'll talk about it. Here we go. Check this out.
What about for your values? I mean, is
They are talking, by the way, about gender transition. That's what the context of this video is. They're talking about gender transition, and this is the question. He's asking him about gender transitioning an 8-year-old.
8 years old, too young?
Yeah, I mean, look, I now that I have a 9-year-old, just became 9, come on, man, I get it. So those are legit. You know, it's interesting, just the issue of age. I'm as someone that's been so focused on equality, broadly, LGBT rights, particularly gay marriage. Mm-hmm. The trans issue for me is also novel. It's over the last few years, I'm trying to understand as much as anyone else. Whole pronoun thing, trying to understand all of that. Well, that was like the hell. I mean, all that stuff. I get it.
Also, we
Okay. So right there. So right there we have a non-answer of epic proportions. He said, hey, do you think 8 years old is too young to transition? And Gavin said, whoa, I got a 9-year-old. I get it. That's not an answer. And I really fought for gay marriage. What does that have to do with what we're talking about? And I tried to understand the pronoun thing, and it was like, whoa, Gavin, the answer is no. The answer is no. You shouldn't gender transition an 8-year-old. That is the answer. And this guy wants to run for president, and he can't tell you that it's wrong to gender transition an 8-year-old child. That is disqualifying, in my opinion, for high office. If you believe that, I think that you are so mistaken and so misguided in your worldview that you can't be elected. You can't be trusted with the keys of democracy. So I think that this is a problem that people like this he's not living in reality. Because the reality is that Gavin Newsom knows that that's crazy. I really think that. I think that he thinks that it would be insane to gender transition an 8-year-old. I think that Gavin Newsom believes that. I'm going to pretend that I have a psychic connection and I can see into his mind. I think that he knows that. He can't say it because he wants the people on the far left to vote for him, because he wants to be seen as a guy who's friendly to the far left, but he also wants to be seen as a moderate. And the problem for you, Gavin, is that you can't be both. You can't be a moderate and also be unable to say that it's crazy to gender transition an 8-year-old child. And I think that when you're not living in reality, you can't win office. And it's important to acknowledge that America is such an outlier on this topic. All of the places. You talk about Americans who want the Scandinavian kind of socialism, and they point to Scandinavia as a place of cultural betterment where they do everything better than us. Look at them. Their parity between men and women is better. They are better with their health care. They're better with their social services. They're better. All of these places have reversed their treatment of transitioning people, and especially kids. Their gender treatment for children is almost non-existent anymore. It has gone backwards. They've shut down all gender clinics in most of these countries. They do not do this. We are an outlier. We are the only people who still think, I know it was popular 7 to 8 years ago to say, hey, transitioning is the way to go. We're just going to transition everybody. It's not anymore. None of the data supports this. I just don't know what to tell you. And this is the one topic that drives me more insane than any other, is the fact that I'll say something like this and people will think that I'm being transphobic. I don't like trans people. It's insane that that's your argument. My argument is that none of the data shows that people live happier and healthier lives post-transition. It just doesn't happen. And especially true with kids, especially true with most kids who are now detransitioning when they get into their 20s. So what you see is a bunch of kids who transition in their early teens, and now they get to be 25, and they're detransitioning, and they're talking about how terrible it was that no adults around them put the stop to this. And you're seeing people sue doctors for this, and I hope that they win. I hope that they win, and I hope that all of these doctors who are making all this money mutilating children go bankrupt and are shunned from society. That's what I hope. And it has nothing to do. The world thinks that we're crazy, and none of this is hateful or bigoted. What I'm saying is the data actually shows that most people who are gender dysphoric grow out of it, especially when you're 8 years old. 99% of them grow out of it. If you're a boy and you're acting a little feminine and you're an 8-year-old, guess what? You're probably going to grow up and be gay. And you know what? That's fine. You can be gay. No one's going to tell you can't be gay. I certainly am not. I don't care. But now, instead of growing up into a gay man, what you're doing is saying, wow, you act a little light in the loafers, huh? We're just going to make you a woman. Why is that better? Why do we think that this is better than just growing up to be gay? Just be gay. It's fine. No one cares. I don't care. And but yet we think that that's better. It's healthier. And we're just going to make you a woman. No, it doesn't work that way, and it's bad. And this topic drives me nuts because the world thinks we're crazy, and they're right. And if Democrats don't distance themselves from this, they are not going to win elections. They're just not. But I'm also afraid that this is going to wind up like COVID, because the Democrats were all wrong about COVID. I was right, by the way. I'm just going to say that. Go back, watch any of my videos. I was right about school closings. I was right about the stupid mask mandates. I was right about 2 weeks to stop the spread. I was right. Go back. Watch it. I'm 100% right on COVID. Apparently, it's smarter than the CDC. And the reality is, I'm not. I just actually read the things that the CDC put out and said, this doesn't make any sense. I was right about the vaccine, and none of it matters because no Democrats are held to account. Doesn't matter. And that's going to be like this with the gender transition stuff. They're all going to be wrong. In a decade, we'll look back, or 2 decades, we're going to look back and say, that was insane. How many people? The fact that we gender transitioned thousands and thousands times more percent than normal, and we just shouldn't have been doing that. That's crazy. And then the Democrats are going to go, yeah, that was a wild time, right? We should just move past it, just like COVID, right? We should just move past. We don't need to look into like who was right and who was wrong, because I'm sure it was a little you and a little me. And then I'll sit there and go, no, I was right and you were wrong. And yet nothing will happen. And that's where we're going to wind up on this, I'm sure. Except in this case, instead of the terrible financial decisions and the mental health problems and the school loss, we're going to wind up with the bodies of mutilated, middle-aged people who just have to look back and say, God, where were the adults, and why did people let me do this? We dropped the ball. We're not protecting kids, and that's ridiculous. And I think that that's just a crazy, crazy thing. And Gavin Newsom won't be president because he can't answer this question. No one should be president if they can't answer this question. None of that is hateful to say. I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for the week. As always, questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below. I will read off your comment if it is funny or insightful. In the case of this week, Andy Man, very insightful, very important to speak clearly when we're talking about things that are important, and to correct ourselves if we say something that's wrong. And I talk a lot, so I'm bound to say things that are borderline wrong or flat out wrong in certain cases, and I always want to correct them if somebody says, hey man, you said something that's not true, and then I look it up, I go, oh yeah, actually I was a little sloppy with my language. I should have been a little more clear. So always appreciate that. That's why you leave the comments below, so we can correct ourselves here, and we can also make fun of people when they say stupid things. So anyway, we'll leave it there for the week. Hope you guys have a great week. I will catch you next Friday.